to today's podcast. I'm Granny Rhea.
And I'm Auntie Donia.
And we're here to talk about super special kids and cake. Yes, cake!
We're coming to you from the studios of Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut. This podcast is brought to you by our book, Let's Talk, Social Communicative Services and Supports for Your Young Child with ASD, published by Paul H. Brooks and available from Amazon.
Our special topic for this podcast has to do with how we play and have fun with our kids at home. What are some of your thoughts about that, Donia?
Well, really, it depends, Granny Rhea, on the age of your super special kids. I think one of the things that can be challenging or parents feel they're under pressure is that they feel they have to be an expert too and have to do therapy. Whereas I actually think that if you think of having fun with your child and that first being the premise, whether they're 12 or 2 or 24, you've got an adult child who's a super special kid, then I think thinking of starting off with their interests and not feeling the pressure that you have to be an expert and do therapy.
And not feeling that you have to be a teacher every minute, too. There are times when parents will want to carry over activities that their therapists and teachers have given them, and that's perfectly appropriate and great for your kids. But there are also times when people should just have fun together and relax and do things that everyone enjoys. So I think just as you might set aside maybe 15 or 20 minutes every day to do therapeutic kinds of activities with your child, you can also set aside 15 or 20 minutes every day to do something that's just fun. Now, we know that sometimes super special kids think things are fun that are not quite the same as what other people think are fun. So sometimes the challenge is figuring out how we as parents can have fun too, doing those things that the super special kids like.
You know, Granny Rhea, I had an example where I was working with a father and he was finding it really difficult to set aside 15 minutes just for special fun time with his son. And when I said to him, or I asked him, what's one of your favorite things that you love to do? And he said, we really enjoy bath time. He said, I change, I put on a pair of swimming trunks because I always get soaked. And he said that that's one of his favorite times. So we agreed that that would be his time with his super special sons. One of them was 8 and one was 5. And he used games that were of interest to them, and they had fun together.
And capitalizing on daily routines is a great idea, too, because you're not having to find an extra 15 minutes every day. You're spending that 15 minutes with the child anyway, so why not have fun with it? Parents of typically developing kids do that, and parents of super special kids should feel entitled to do it as well.
That's right. And I think sometimes there's the pressure, as you had said earlier, where a parent may feel that they have to teach something. Whereas if you're actually not expecting your child to repeat what you say, but you are mindful of what you're saying, so you're slowing down your rate of speech, you're naming some of the objects rather than expecting them to name them, especially for the younger children, that's a great way to indirectly teach language and vocabulary.
Absolutely, but we still want to keep the focus on fun, don't we?
Absolutely.
We don't want the kids to feel like a bath is a lesson, so we definitely want to make sure that everybody has a good time. I was thinking, too, about other ways to play with older children, and one principle that we like to try to adhere to with super special kids is to try to use materials that are chronologically age appropriate. So if you've got a super special kid who's a teenager or an adult, sometimes there's a tendency to keep on using the same toys with them that they used when they were little, and maybe they still like them. And that's okay. But you want to start to introduce more age-appropriate materials as well. So let's say you've got a super special 12-year-old who has always loved playing with a little round rubber ball and throwing it back and forth and maybe just throwing it around the yard and having other people chase it. One way you can kind of move towards chronologically age-appropriate materials is to say, instead of using that rubber ball, why not use a football to do it? Throw a football around.
That's a great idea.
Let them wear a helmet while they're throwing the football. Anything that you can do to kind of introduce them to things that other kids their age do will give them additional opportunities to make friends and to have play experiences with peers.
I knew a super special kid. He was an older young man, and when he was little, he really enjoyed sorting things. And him and his dad at the weekends would go into the garage, and he would help his dad sort the different screws. He would, his dad was a carpenter. He did it as a hobby. So they would have a lot of fun, and it was mostly non-verbal. It was things, they would just be hanging out in the garage together, and he would be sorting or giving him the different pieces of wood because he could match them up for him.
What a wonderful story, Auntie Donia. And that really reminds us how we have to kind of search for these common ground areas that we can create with our super special kids. And I'm sure the father had to do a little bit of thinking to come up with that activity. And so sometimes we have to think about other ways we can include our super special kids in activities that we do as a family or as individuals. And it is important for each person in the family to have some time to spend with the super special kid alone in a intimate kind of situation, so that the child has a chance to develop relationships with each person in the family. We should talk sometime about SIBs and super special kids, because they are a great resource.
I was thinking that too. And just as another activity that you can do, I think sort of bedtime reading is a really lovely activity that you can do. But with your older super special kids, that could be watching a YouTube video together that you both enjoy. And you can find those books where the language isn't as difficult or as complicated, but they're high-level interest. So it's an interesting topic to a teenager, but the language is not as complicated.
And you bring up a great point about technology, too. Many of our super special kids, even those who might have cognitive limitations, really enjoy technology. And helping them to use technology in a way, again, that they can share with peers is a great way to promote their inclusion.
I love that idea. And like you said, we live in a technology world where that's very much part of our lives now.
And certainly part of young people's lives.
Yeah. So, Granny Rhea, let's see what one of our listeners has sent us for today's super special question. So, Granny Rhea, what's our super special question for today?
Well, one of our listeners has asked, what's the best way to set up successful play dates and create social opportunities for your super special child?
That's a really good question. I think the first thing is your child ready for a play date? That would be my very first response. And we know that we want our super special kids to spend time with their friends, but once you select a friend who you think would be a good match, so someone who they could be a fellow super special kid, but they don't have to be. They could be a cousin or another friend. And I would say the first thing to consider is setting a time limit. So not having the expectation that they're going to be playing for the afternoon. It could be a 45-minute to an hour play date maximum. The next thing that I would consider is actually having a mini schedule for what's going to happen during the play date. So for example, the children may come back, they may have something to eat, they may have a game, or they may even cook or do something with you, and then they would get ready to go home. So I would definitely schedule it out and know ahead of time what's going to happen, and let the parent of the child that's being invited to the play date know that it is going to be for an hour. The other thing that I would recommend is that it doesn't always have to be in their home. It could be at the local park. It could be going to the Natural History Museum. I know that for me, I used to take a super special kid and another little boy, and they used to go together to the zoo in London. They would visit London Zoo, and we would only go and visit the penguins. So we would walk in, they would hold each other's hands, they would run to the penguins, they would stick their faces up against the glass, they would watch the penguins going up and down and sliding, and then we would have something to eat, and the children would go home.
That sounds like a really nice time. I'd like to go on a date like that.
Have to take you the next time you're in London, Granny Rhea.
Sounds great. So I think the thing about setting up social opportunities for our super special kids is that they do need to be set up. We need to do some advanced planning. This is certainly true for older children and even teenagers who may be interested in having age-appropriate friends, but aren't able to acquire them on their own. For older children, teenagers, for example, even young college students, there are some organizations that help with providing friends for super special kids. You may have heard about the Best Buddies program. These are our teenagers and college students who work with super special kids. They meet them at a certain time every week, and there are group activities planned, and it's kind of an organized social activity. And these are great ways for your super special older child to have opportunities to work with peers. Some high schools require students to do community service, and one of the community services they can do is to tutor or be a peer buddy for a super special kid. And whenever these programs are available, it's great to hook up with them. And if they're not available, it's great to talk to the school administration about starting them, because they can benefit so many of our children.
I love those ideas, Granny Rhea.
Auntie Donia, there are so many myths and misconceptions in working with children with developmental disabilities. And some of them are so absurd, they just make us go, arghhh! One of the things that drives me crazy, Auntie Donia, and of course, I work with students a lot who are training to be therapists and teachers, and they all like to be so polite to their students. And so very often they'll say something like, "We're going to play this game, okay?" Well, what if the child says no? It's not okay. That is really not a good way to start a conversation. Or they'll say something like, "Look at this nice car. Do you want to play with it?" Well, what if they say no? And that's part of your lesson plan. Then you're in trouble.
I've actually witnessed that myself, where a student therapist was waiting, the child was waiting in the waiting room, and she went to the child and said to him, "Would you like to come and play with me?" And he looked up at her and said, "No."
And you've given him complete permission to say exactly that. So, when we work with super special kids, and really when we work with any kids, I think we don't want to give them that option. We want to say, "We're going to play this game now. You start. It's your turn."
Exactly. And I think it's all about being clear and making expectations clear to them. We've mentioned this before, that we always want to help children and tell them what we want them to do rather than what we don't want them to do. And you can offer a choice. So you can say, "We're going to go and play. Would you like to play with the teddy or with the hungry gorilla?"
Right. And then you've given the child permission to do something where no matter what choice he makes, you're prepared to go forward with that choice. But to offer him a false choice, like saying, "Do you want to?" is really misleading and not fair. And I think both as therapists and as parents, we want to try to avoid that trap.
Granny Rhea, there is nothing wrong with eating cake for breakfast.
You are so right, Auntie Donia, and we're going to be talking about some things that are as much fun as eating cake for breakfast. So, Auntie Donia, what cake are we eating for breakfast today?
So today, it's all about everyday outings. So going for a walk, or going on the bus, or going on the ride on the train, and not necessarily to do anything, but just for the sake of going on the train.
Or just going out, just getting out of the house, going somewhere else. And one important thing about these kind of outings is they don't have to cost any money, except maybe the bus fare. But they're ways that we can spend time with our child doing something that's enjoyable for them without necessarily it's being a big educational event.
My mum would do this with one of my nephews, Ilyas, and it was one of his favourite things to do. They would ride a double-decker bus, and they would go only the equivalent of 2 underground stops, and then they would get on the underground and they would take the 2 stops back home, and then they would walk home. So it was the bus ride and the train ride that was probably about 45 minutes in total. That was really one of his favourite outings. And when my mum would come to pick him up, he would say, "Going on the red bus?"
That does sound like a lot of fun. I'm sure there are things that we can think of to do with super special kids that are kind of along those lines, even if we don't live in a city where there are buses and trains to take. For example, if we go to the supermarket, we might be able to go to the aisle where all the rice is and take some of the different containers of rice off the shelf and shake them a little bit and listen to what the different sounds sound like.
I love that idea. And if you live by a forest or if you live by a lake, it's really nice to go on a short outing where you can just walk around the lake or go for a short walk in the forest.
Taking scavenger hunts is also fun, where we might make a list of things we could find along the way and see if we can identify or gather those objects. So if you're taking a walk on a suburban street, you might look for things like fallen leaves or litter that you can pick up and put in a trash can.
Good idea.
Or maybe bottles or something that you can recycle. So we can just kind of make a list of things we might find and see how many of them we can find. And if we find all of them, we can get some sort of a prize. Making an outing just fun for the sake of being together.
That's lovely.
So Auntie Donia, today we have a special treat. We have a salted caramel truffle cake from Cafe Atlantique in Milford. It really looks beautiful. It's all white and it's got 2 little bundles of caramel on the top. I just can't wait to try it.
I know. I'm just interested when you cut it up what it looks like in the middle as well.
Ooh, it's cake and it's a ball of cotton icing. It's kind of like those ice cream balls.
Oh, yes.
The Let's Talk About Super Special Kids and Cake podcast would like to thank our host, Sacred Heart University's School of Communication and Media Studies. We'd also like to thank our composer, Marty Eisenberg, our editor, Brent, and our audio engineer and director of cake-based operations, Matt Henshaw.